homeless Maid married a man in a vegetative state, but his true identity as a CEO shocked everyone. Lily Anderson had always been the kind of person who could find beauty in the simplest things. In the soft morning light that filtered through the curtains of her modest apartment, in the quiet hum of the world waking up outside her window, and in the faces of the patients she cared for at the local hospital, there was a kind of peace that most people would overlook. She didn't need grand gestures or the glitz of a fast-paced life. Her joy came from the smaller moments, helping a child find comfort in the hospital, sharing a cup of coffee with a friend after a long shift, or simply watching the sun dip below the horizon at the end of a tiring day. At 27, she had learned the value of contentment. She wasn't someone who dreamed of riches or fame. She just wanted to live a life that was meaningful, one that brought her peace and purpose. The small town of Brooksville, where she had grown up, was where she had always felt most at home. The same town where she still worked at the local hospital as a nurse, and where she was known by almost everyone. Lily had always considered herself an ordinary woman in many ways, and yet, in the quiet way she moved through life, she had made an extraordinary impact on the people around her. But there was one thing that always troubled her, something that tugged at her heart when the day's work was done and the house was silent. It was the emptiness that she felt at the end of the day, when she would lie down and find herself longing for a love that was truly hers. The kind of love that didn't just come with small gestures, but with a depth of connection. She had always imagined a life where she could give her heart fully to someone who could love her in return. Everything changed one fateful evening. It was a regular shift, one that felt like any other, until the sirens wailed in the distance. Lily was in the break room when she heard the loud rumble of an ambulance pulling into the hospital parking lot. She glanced up at the clock. It was late, and her shift was winding down, but the urgency in the air told her this was no ordinary arrival. Her heart beat faster as she rushed toward the emergency room, following the paramedics who were unloading a stretcher. She didn't know what she expected, but she wasn't prepared for what she saw. The man on the stretcher was unconscious, his body battered and bruised, his breathing shallow. His face was pale, and his eyes were closed in an unnatural stillness. His clothes were torn and bloodied, a stark contrast to the pristine white sheets of the stretcher he lay upon. He was young, probably in his early 30s, and Lily immediately knew that he had been in a serious car accident. As the medical team worked to stabilize him, Lily took charge of his care, her hands moving instinctively as she guided him into an examination room. There was something about the way his features were drawn, the vulnerability of his unconscious state, that stirred something deep inside her. He was a stranger to her, but something about him made her feel like she couldn't look away. "Name?" the attending doctor asked as they hooked him up to monitors. "Unknown," Lily responded, scanning his body for any identification. "I'll check his pockets." She found nothing but a torn wallet with no identification, just a few business cards and a thick folded sheet of paper with a letterhead she didn't recognize. Confused, she set the cards aside and focused on the task at hand. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen this man before. There was a familiarity to his face, though she couldn't place it. As the night wore on, Lily remained at his side, checking his vitals, administering medications, and making sure that everything was in place for his recovery. She learned his name eventually, Ethan Matthews, but there was still so much about him that remained a mystery. His family had not been reached, and there were no visitors. It was just him and her in that sterile white room. Despite the quiet, Lily found herself talking to him, as she did with many of her patients. She told him about her day, about the patients she had seen, and the struggles she faced. She spoke as though he could hear her, as though he was listening, though she knew he wasn't. Still, something in her felt like she needed to share these moments with him. She found herself whispering to him, as if in a silent prayer that he would wake up, that he would come back to her. As days passed and Ethan remained in a vegetative state, Lily continued her care, her emotions shifting from clinical to something more personal. She found herself thinking about him more often than she should. It was strange, this connection she felt toward a man who couldn't even respond to her. Yet, each time she sat by his bed, each time she adjusted his position or made him more comfortable, she felt like she was doing something meaningful. And then one evening, as she checked his heart rate, something unexpected happened. A small, almost imperceptible movement from Ethan caught her eye. His hand twitched, his fingers barely, but it was enough for Lily to catch her breath. She leaned closer, her heart pounding. "Ethan," she whispered, "can you hear me?" For a few moments, there was no response. Lily held her breath, praying for something more. And then, another twitch, a slight squeeze of his fingers. It was so faint, so small, but it was real. The discovery of Ethan's movement changed something inside Lily. She didn't know what it was, but there was a shift in her heart, a feeling that she couldn't ignore. She told herself it was nothing, that it was just the body's natural reaction, but her intuition told her differently. She began spending more time at the hospital, caring for Ethan, learning about his habits from the few scraps of information she could gather. Lily didn't know what had caused Ethan's accident or what his life had been like before. What she did know was that she felt a deep responsibility to him, a pull she couldn't explain. The connection between them deepened, and with every passing day, she grew more determined to help him recover, to bring him back from the edge of nothingness. It wasn't until one morning, after days of him showing more signs of life, slightly moving his head, blinking his eyes, that Lily found herself standing in the doorway of Ethan's room, staring at him with an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. "I'm not going to leave you, Ethan," she whispered, almost as if making a promise to herself. "I'm here. I'll be here for as long as it takes." As she stood there, gazing at the man she knew so little about, but who she had begun to care for so deeply, Lily made a decision, one that would change everything. She knew that her life was no longer just about simple moments, quiet days, and the comfortable routine she had lived. She was about to step into an unknown world, a world of uncertainty and challenge, but a world that might just offer the love she had always longed for. The days that followed were a blur. Lily felt caught between the sterile world of the hospital, with its constant beeping machines and fluorescent lights, and the strange personal space that had slowly started to develop between her and Ethan. She found herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't quite explain, pulled by a thread of connection that felt deeper than anything she had ever experienced. Her days were still filled with the routine of caring for her other patients, checking vitals, administering medication, and performing all the necessary tasks that came with her role as a nurse. But her mind often wandered back to Ethan, the way his hand had twitched, the subtle movement of his fingers. It was the first real sign of life she had seen from him since the accident. It wasn't much, but it was enough to stir something in her chest, something fragile and tender. Every day she would stand by his bedside, watching, waiting for more. But as the days passed, Ethan's condition remained unchanged. He didn't wake up. His body still lay motionless, as though trapped in some distant world where no one could reach him. But Lily couldn't stop coming back. She couldn't stop speaking to him, telling him about her day, telling him stories of the people she cared for, of the world that was moving on without him. Each time she spoke, she hoped for something, anything that might indicate that he could hear her. And sometimes, just sometimes, she thought she saw the faintest flicker in his eyes, as if he was trying to respond, trying to acknowledge her presence. But each time it was as fleeting as a shadow. Lily found herself unable to stay away from Ethan, even when her shift ended. After clocking out, she would often sneak back into the hospital, finding a quiet corner to sit and read, or simply watch him. It was a strange kind of ritual, one that comforted her, though she couldn't explain why. She wasn't sure if it was hope that kept her coming back, or a deeper, unspoken connection that had started to form. Her colleagues noticed her growing attachment to Ethan, and some of them voiced their concern. One evening, as she sat next to him, her head resting against the edge of his bed, one of the nurses approached her. Lily, Sarah, a fellow nurse, said gently, "You're still here? You've been working double shifts lately. You should take a break. You're not going to be any good to him if you burn out yourself." Lily blinked, looking up at Sarah, a little startled by the concern in her voice. "I'm fine," she replied softly, smiling weakly. "Just taking care of him." Sarah didn't look convinced. "Lily, he's been in a coma for weeks. You can't keep doing this to yourself. There's no recovery happening right now. It's hard to accept, but sometimes you have to let go. Let him go." The words stung more than Lily cared to admit. Let him go. How could she? She had already committed to being there for him. She couldn't walk away now. There was something in her that refused to give up, something in her that refused to let Ethan slip away without a fight. "I can't," Lily murmured, almost to herself. "I just can't." Days blurred into one another. It was early one morning, the hospital still eerily quiet, when something unusual happened. Lily had been sitting by Ethan's bedside, her fingers gently brushing the back of his hand, when a soft noise broke the silence. It was a faint, almost imperceptible sound, but it made her heart leap in her chest. A single breath. A breath deeper than the shallow, mechanical rhythm of the ventilator that had been doing most of the work for him. It was almost as if Ethan was trying to breathe on his own. Lily's heart raced as she leaned closer, her breath held in anticipation. Another breath, slightly stronger than the first. Then, another. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling with hope. "Can you hear me?" For a moment, there was only silence. Lily watched him intently, her hands hovering near his. She didn't dare move, didn't dare blink, fearing that if she missed something, it might all slip away. Then, something more, a tiny shift in his fingers, the smallest of movements. It was so faint, so delicate, but it was enough to send a shockwave through Lily's entire body. She gasped almost too loudly and immediately regretted it, but she couldn't help herself. He had responded. Even if it was just a little, Ethan had moved. He had heard her. Her hands shook as she pressed the call button, her voice barely audible when she spoke. "Doctor, come quick." "There's movement. Ethan, he's responding." The doctors arrived quickly, their faces a mixture of concern and skepticism. They examined Ethan thoroughly, checking his vitals, running more tests, and discussing his condition in hushed tones. Lily stood back, anxiously watching their every move, but her hope began to ebb when they spoke. "It's possible the body is reacting involuntarily," Dr. Roberts, one of the senior physicians, said, frowning as he adjusted his glasses. "But we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. This could just be a reflex. We've seen this before, especially in cases like his." Lily's heart sank. She had seen the flicker of life in Ethan's movements, and she couldn't accept the idea that it was nothing. She couldn't let go of the hope that maybe, just maybe, Ethan was waking up. "Isn't there something more we can do?" she asked, her voice strained. "I've seen him respond. It's subtle, but it's there. Please, don't give up on him." Dr. Roberts turned to her, his expression softening just a little. "We're not giving up on him, Lily. But we need to be realistic. His brain activity is minimal. He may never fully recover. You have to prepare yourself for that possibility." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She knew the statistics, had read the studies. She understood the risks. But she couldn't let go of the man who, in some inexplicable way, had begun to matter so much to her. "I won't give up," Lily whispered, more to herself than anyone else. That night, Lily stayed late, not wanting to leave Ethan's side. She talked to him quietly, telling him stories about her life, about the things she had seen, about the world outside the hospital walls. And as she spoke, she felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't just his nurse anymore. She was his companion, his confidant, and she would remain that, no matter how long it took for him to wake up. And then, just as she was about to leave for the night, something unexpected happened. Ethan's hand moved again. It wasn't much, just the slightest twitch, but it was enough to make Lily stop in her tracks. Her heart raced as she leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. She watched in silence, hoping, praying, and then the unthinkable happened. Ethan's eyes fluttered open just a little, as though fighting the weight of sleep. His pupils, though unfocused, shifted slightly in her direction. Lily's heart skipped a beat. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He didn't speak. His eyes closed again, and he fell back into the haze of unconsciousness. But Lily knew now. She knew that Ethan was still there, still fighting. It wasn't over, not yet. To be continued. Lily could barely sleep that night. Ethan's faint response lingered in her mind, replaying over and over as she lay in bed, staring at the cracks in her ceiling. His hand had moved, his eyes had fluttered open. For the briefest of moments it was proof that he was still there, still fighting. Her heart brimmed with cautious hope, though doubt lingered in the corners of her mind. What if it was just another reflex? What if the doctors were right and she was clinging to something that wasn't real? But her instincts told her otherwise. She had seen life in him, even if it was just a flicker. The next morning she arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. The halls were quiet, save for the distant beeping of monitors and the shuffle of nurses preparing for the day. Lily went straight to Ethan's room, her pulse quickening as she approached. She hesitated for a moment outside the door, her hand resting on the cold metal handle. What if nothing had changed, she thought. What if yesterday had been a fluke? But when she stepped inside, her breath caught. Ethan was still, as he had been every other day, but there was something different about the room. His presence felt less empty, less distant. She couldn't explain it, but it felt as though he was closer to her now, closer to waking. By mid-morning, the doctors arrived for their rounds. Dr. Roberts led the team, his demeanor calm and clinical as always. Lily watched as they examined Ethan, running their routine tests and noting his vitals on their clipboards. She waited anxiously, her fingers gripping the edge of her clipboard, as if bracing for impact. "Well, Doctor," Roberts said finally, his tone neutral. "His vitals are stable. No significant changes overnight." Lily frowned, stepping forward. "What about the movement yesterday?" His eyes opened for a moment, his hand moved. "Isn't that progress?" Dr. Roberts glanced at her, his expression patient but skeptical. "Lily, I know you're invested in this case, but these movements could be involuntary. The brain can produce reflexes even in patients with minimal activity. It doesn't necessarily mean he's waking up." "But it felt intentional," Lily insisted, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've been by his side every day. I know the difference between a reflex and a response. I'm telling you, there's something there." The room fell silent for a moment, the tension thick enough to cut. Dr. Roberts sighed, rubbing his temple. "We'll keep monitoring him closely. If there's more consistent activity, we'll reevaluate. But for now, we can't draw any conclusions." Lily felt a wave of frustration wash over her as the doctors left the room, their skepticism hanging in the air like a cloud. She wanted to scream, to make them understand what she had seen. But she knew that arguing wouldn't change their minds. The medical world dealt in certainties, in hard evidence, and Ethan's condition didn't fit neatly into their expectations. That evening, as the hospital quieted down and the soft glow of twilight filled the room, Lily sat by Ethan's bedside once again. Her hand rested gently on his, her thumb tracing small circles over his knuckles. She spoke to him softly, as she always did, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "I know you're in there, Ethan," she whispered. "I know it, and I'm not giving up on you, no matter what anyone says. You've already shown me that you're fighting, and I'll keep fighting with you." She paused, her eyes scanning his still features. He looked peaceful, almost serene, but she knew the battle he was waging beneath the surface was anything but. "I've been thinking about you a lot," she continued, her voice wavering slightly. "I wonder what your life was like before all of this. Who you were, what you cared about. I don't even know what your favorite color is, or if you like coffee or tea. But I want to know. I want to know everything." As the words spilled out, Lily felt a tear slip down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed by her own vulnerability, even though no one was there to see it. She was falling deeper into this strange, one-sided connection, and it terrified her, but it also gave her purpose, something to hold on to in the uncertainty of it all. And then it happened again. A twitch. This time, it wasn't just a fleeting movement. Ethan's hand tightened slightly around hers, the pressure faint but unmistakable. Lily gasped, her heart racing as she stared at their intertwined hands. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling, "can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." For a long moment, there was nothing. Lily held her breath, her eyes locked on his face, willing him to respond. And then, slowly, she felt it again, a slight, deliberate squeeze. Tears welled up in her eyes as she leaned closer, her voice breaking. "You're waking up," she said, barely able to contain her emotion. "You're really waking up." The next morning, Lily reported the incident to the medical team, her voice filled with conviction as she recounted what had happened. But instead of the validation she had hoped for, she was met with skepticism once again. "Lily," Dr. Roberts said, his tone cautious, "I know you're trying to help, but you have to be careful not to read too much into these small movements. It's easy to let your emotions cloud your judgment." "My judgment isn't clouded," Lily shot back, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "I know what I saw. He responded to me. He's trying to communicate." Dr. Roberts sighed, his expression sympathetic but firm. "We'll continue monitoring him, but we can't jump to conclusions. These things take time." Lily clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She wanted to scream at them, to make them see what she saw, but she knew that words wouldn't change their minds. She would have to prove it to them, somehow. As the days went on, Lily found herself growing more isolated. Her colleagues began to whisper about her behind her back, questioning her objectivity. Some even suggested that she was becoming too emotionally involved with Ethan's case. But Lily didn't care. She knew what she had seen, and she wasn't going to let anyone convince her otherwise. Her connection to Ethan grew stronger with each passing day. She began to notice more subtle changes, the way his breathing seemed more even, the faint flicker of his eyelids when she spoke to him. She didn't know what it all meant, but she believed with every fiber of her being that Ethan was coming back to her. One evening, as Lily sat by Ethan's bedside, reading aloud from a worn paperback novel, something extraordinary happened. Ethan's eyes fluttered open just for a moment, and this time they stayed open. His gaze was unfocused, but it was there alive, searching. Lily froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. His lips parted slightly as if he was trying to speak. It was faint, barely audible, but Lily heard it a single word. Lily. Her name. He had said her name. Tears streamed down her face as she reached for his hand, her voice breaking. "I'm here," she said. "I'm right here." For the first time, Ethan's gaze met hers, and in that moment, everything changed. He was no longer just a patient, no longer just a man in a vegetative state. He was Ethan, and he was waking up. The hospital room was bathed in the soft glow of early morning light, filtering through the blinds like threads of hope, weaving into the stillness. Lily sat at Ethan's bedside, her fingers gently brushing the back of his hand, the same hand that had squeezed hers only a day ago. The memory was fresh in her mind, a beacon in the storm of emotions that had swept over her. Ethan had spoken her name. He had woken up just a moment, just a whisper. But it had been enough. Enough to reignite the spark of belief she had been clinging to for so long. Now, as she sat there, she studied his face with a quiet intensity, watching every subtle movement, every shift in his expression, as though willing him to continue what he had started. His breathing was steady, his chest rising and falling with each breath, but his eyes remained closed, as they had been for weeks. The progress was slow, agonizingly so, but it was there. It was real. Lily had always believed in small miracles, in the quiet, unnoticed moments that built something bigger. The world around her may have dismissed Ethan as a lost cause, but she knew better. She knew that in the silence of his body, his mind was still alive, still fighting, and she would fight with him. The next few days were a slow crawl. Ethan's responses were still faint and sporadic. His hand would twitch occasionally, his chest would rise with a breath deeper than the shallow ones he had been taking, but each change was so subtle that it was almost impossible to be sure. It wasn't enough to tell the doctors or the nurses. They were still cautious, still reluctant to embrace the possibility of progress. Lily found herself becoming more isolated, not just from the staff, but from her friends and family as well. They called, they texted, they asked how Ethan was doing, but they didn't understand. They didn't see what she saw. They didn't hear his name whispered. At night, Lily would sit by his side long after her shift had ended, the hum of the machines and the quiet rhythm of the hospital almost soothing in its consistency. She would talk to him, even if he couldn't hear her, even if he couldn't respond. She needed to believe that her words were reaching him. Sometimes she would play his favorite music, soft jazz that had once filled the halls of his office, and sometimes she would read to him from books she knew he'd enjoyed. But one evening, as she sat beside him reading aloud from a dog-eared novel, something shifted. Ethan's fingers twitched, then slowly curled around hers. This time, the movement was deliberate, stronger, more purposeful. Lily froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes locked on his hand. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Ethan, can you hear me?" For a moment, there was no response. Then his lips parted just enough for her to hear the faintest of sounds. "Lily." The word came out like a rasp, hoarse and weak, but it was undeniably his voice. Tears sprang to Lily's eyes as she squeezed his hand, unable to stop the flow. "I'm here," she whispered fiercely. "I'm here, Ethan. I'm not going anywhere." The days after that moment felt like a blur of emotions. Ethan's waking was slow, painfully so. His eyes began to flutter open for longer stretches, and he started to blink in response to the sounds around him. But his speech remained disjointed, his words barely audible. The doctors remained cautious, even as Ethan's condition continued to improve. They ran test after test, checking his cognitive function, monitoring his progress. But it was clear to Lily that Ethan was trying. He was there, fighting to come back. And with every small change, her resolve grew stronger. One morning, as Lily sat beside his bed, holding his hand and talking to him about the things they had once shared, Ethan's eyes opened fully for the first time in weeks. His gaze was unfocused at first, as though he was still adjusting to the world around him, but then gradually it sharpened. His eyes locked with hers. "Lily." His voice was stronger now, though still rough, but the recognition in his eyes made her heart skip. "I'm here," Lily repeated softly, her voice trembling. "I'm right here." Ethan blinked, and for a moment he seemed to be searching her face, as though trying to make sense of the moment. His hand tightened around hers, and Lily leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're safe now. You're awake, Ethan. You're not alone." Ethan's gaze softened, his brow furrowing as though trying to recall something. The confusion in his eyes was obvious, but so was the relief. He was aware. He was back. I don't know what happened." His voice faltered as he tried to speak. "How long?" "It's been a while," Lily replied gently. "You've been in a coma. You've been unconscious for weeks." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, as though processing the information, before his gaze snapped back to hers. I don't remember much, just flashes, pain, then darkness." Lily swallowed hard, her heart aching as she brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice steady but filled with love and concern. "You're here now. You're awake." For the first time, Lily saw something in Ethan's eyes that she hadn't seen before: vulnerability. His usual composure, the sharp confidence that had always marked him, was replaced by something more fragile. Ethan had always been a man in control, the CEO who had built an empire. But now he was just a man who had been lost, fighting to come back to himself. The next few days were filled with Ethan's slow recovery, but as he regained some of his strength, questions began to surface. questions that Ethan had no answers to yet. His memories were patchy, and the doctors couldn't offer any real insight. Lily tried to keep things calm, but there was a tension between them, an undercurrent of uncertainty that neither of them could ignore. Ethan knew that his life, the life he had known before the accident, was slipping away. He could feel the gaping hole where the pieces of his former identity should be. And Lily had become the most important person in his life, but she had also become a symbol of everything he had lost. One afternoon, as Lily sat by his bedside, Ethan turned to her with a furrowed brow. "Who am I, Lily?" The question was quiet, almost a whisper, but the weight of it hit her like a ton of bricks. Lily's throat tightened, and for a moment she didn't know how to respond. The Ethan who had once ruled over boardrooms and commanded respect from all corners of the business world was no longer there. The man lying in front of her was a stranger, in some ways vulnerable, fragile, and deeply uncertain of who he was. "You're Ethan Matthews," she said softly, her voice tender. "You're a fighter, a survivor, and right now you're recovering. That's all that matters." Ethan's eyes locked onto hers, searching, as if trying to understand whether she truly saw him, whether she still saw him for who he was, even in the face of all he had lost. "I don't remember anything," he said quietly, almost in disbelief. "I don't remember what I did, who I was before this, but I remember you, Lily. I remember you." Lily's heart swelled, but she couldn't hide the pain in her eyes. The man she had once known was somewhere inside him, but finding him again, recovering those lost pieces, would take more than just time. It would take healing, both physical and emotional, and she wasn't sure if they were ready for the journey ahead. But one thing was clear. Despite the uncertainty, despite the fragments of the man Ethan used to be, there was something in his gaze that Lily had always known to be true. She loved him, and that love was not tied to the man he had been. It was tied to the man who was right in front of her, broken, uncertain, but still fighting to find his way back. The days stretched into weeks, and the lines between hope and despair began to blur. Ethan's condition was improving, slowly and in ways that felt both monumental and minuscule. He had begun to speak more, to engage with his surroundings, but the man he had once been seemed so far removed from the person who lay before her. Lily watched him, day after day, her heart torn between the familiar confidence she remembered in him and the vulnerability he wore so plainly now. Each morning she arrived at the hospital, her heart racing in anticipation. Each night she left with the same mixture of uncertainty and quiet relief. There were days when she could almost convince herself that he was going to be the man he had once been, the strong, capable man who ran a business empire and charmed the room with a single smile. But then the fragile moments would remind her of the gulf between that man and the one she was caring for now. Ethan's memories were still fragmented, the timeline of his life blurred by the haze of the coma and the accident that had nearly taken everything from him. He would ask questions, sometimes about mundane things, what his favorite meal had been, the names of friends or colleagues, but more often than not, he would look at her with an expression she couldn't read. There were flashes of recognition, yes, but there were just as many moments when he seemed to forget that they had ever shared a life together. Lily didn't know what to make of the mixed emotions that had begun to take root in her heart. One moment, she felt as though the bond they had shared before was still there, lingering beneath the surface, just waiting to be uncovered. The next, she was overwhelmed by the distance between them, the silence that had grown between them in the years he had been absent from her life. She had never imagined that rebuilding their relationship would feel like this, as if she was getting to know a stranger who had once been her everything. One afternoon, Lily sat by Ethan's side, her fingers lightly brushing the pages of a book she had been reading aloud to him. She'd taken to reading to him during her long hours at the hospital, her voice steady and soft, hoping the words would reach him. Today she had chosen one of his favorite novels, one she knew he had always kept on his desk. The rhythmic sound of her voice filled the room, a small, familiar comfort amidst the uncertainty. But then, just as she turned to the next page, she felt a slight shift. Ethan was watching her, his eyes no longer distant or unfocused. He had been silent for a while, his thoughts drifting somewhere beyond her reach, but now he seemed more present. Lily. His voice was rough, like gravel, but it was unmistakably his. "Why are you doing this?" The question hung in the air between them, and Lily's heart caught in her throat. She stopped, not sure if she had heard him right, but when she met his gaze, she saw the vulnerability in his eyes. Ethan wasn't asking her this with the old sense of command, the way he might have once asked for something with authority. This was a question born out of confusion, born out of a place of deep uncertainty. "Doing what?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. She had learned to be patient with him, to give him the space he needed to process the fog that still clouded his mind. "Staying here with me?" His voice trembled slightly, a crack in the calm exterior he had been trying to maintain. "I'm not the man I was before. I don't even know if I'll ever be him again." Lily's heart ached at the rawness of his words. She leaned forward slightly, taking his hand gently in hers, her fingers brushing against the cool skin of his wrist. "Ethan," she said, her voice unwavering despite the tears that threatened to slip from her eyes. "You're here. That's all that matters. You're alive and you're fighting. That's enough for me. It's more than enough." His brow furrowed, and for a long moment there was silence. Ethan's gaze moved away from hers, and Lily could see the struggle in his eyes as he tried to make sense of the emotions stirring within him. He didn't want to feel weak, didn't want to feel dependent on anyone, least of all her. He had been the one who had built his life with strength, with control, but now he was so far removed from that man, from that version of himself. "I don't know how to live like this," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Lily gently squeezed his hand, her thumb brushing over his knuckles. "You don't have to know everything right now. We'll take it one day at a time, okay? One moment at a time." Ethan looked at her then, his eyes filled with something Lily couldn't quite name, something raw, something fragile. For the first time in what felt like forever, she saw the depth of his pain, the weight of the guilt and fear he had been carrying with him all this time. "I don't deserve you," he murmured, almost as if he were ashamed to say it aloud. Lily shook her head, the tears finally escaping her eyes, but she didn't care. "You don't have to be the man you were before, Ethan. I'm here because I believe in you. I believe in us. We don't need to go back to what was. We can create something new, together." Over the next few days, as Ethan's recovery continued at a slow but steady pace, Lily's own internal struggle began to deepen. She had been certain about her feelings for him in the beginning. Her love for him had always been unwavering, even in the face of judgment, even when no one else understood her decision to stay by his side. But now, with each new fragment of the man he used to be returning, she began to question herself. The man Ethan had been the CEO, the man who had built an empire and never let anything stand in his way, wasn't just gone. He was buried beneath the layers of a life he no longer remembered. And Lily, despite her deep love for him, had to ask herself if she could love the man who was emerging now. Ethan was changing, slowly, but he was changing. Some days he would laugh, remembering an inside joke from his past, while other days he would be distant, lost in his thoughts, overwhelmed by the weight of his situation. Lily was there for all of it, but a part of her couldn't help but feel the strain. It wasn't just about him recovering, it was about her recovery too. She had spent so long believing that Ethan would return to her, that he would be the man she had always loved, that she hadn't fully prepared herself for the reality of who he might be now. She hadn't thought about how she might need to change too, to fit into a new life with him. She hadn't anticipated how much it would take to adjust to a man who was so different, even in the smallest ways. One evening, just as the sky turned to a deep indigo, Lily found herself standing by the window of Ethan's room, looking out at the distant city lights. She hadn't realized that she had been there for over an hour, lost in her own thoughts, when she heard Ethan's voice, faint and weak, behind her. "Lily," he called softly, and she turned, her heart skipping a beat as she saw him sitting up in bed, the covers crumpled around him. He was breathing a little heavier than usual, and his face looked pale, but his eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "Ethan, you're not supposed to be out of bed," she said, rushing to his side, her concern flooding through her. But as she moved closer, she saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't just exhaustion. There was something more there, a sense of panic. "I can't do this anymore," Ethan said, his voice breaking as he looked at her, his chest rising and falling with agitation. "I can't stay in this bed forever, not knowing who I am. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when I feel like I've lost myself." The tears she had been holding back for so long began to fall, but this time she didn't wipe them away. She reached for him, her heart aching as she sat beside him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "You don't have to do it alone, Ethan," she whispered, holding him tighter. "I'm right here. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You just have to keep going, and I'll be with you every step of the way." In that moment, everything that had been weighing on them both, the uncertainty, the fear, the emotional distance, seemed to fade. It wasn't about who he had been or who he might become. It was about the simple, unspoken truth that they were here together, and that, for now, was enough. The days that followed Ethan's moment of panic were filled with silence and quiet understanding. They were no longer racing against time, hoping for grand improvements or miraculous moments. It was clear to both of them now, healing would not be a straight line. It would be jagged, full of setbacks and small victories, and they had to learn to navigate it together. Lily's role had changed. No longer was she just the nurse, the caretaker. She was now something else, his anchor, his quiet refuge from a world that had shifted beyond recognition for him. Ethan needed time to remember who he was, but he also needed someone who would patiently sit with him as he figured it out. Someone who would not ask too much, not expect him to be who he was before, but simply allow him to exist as he was now. Each day felt like a slow unraveling, a peeling away of the layers that had once defined him. Ethan wasn't the CEO anymore. He wasn't the man who had the world at his feet, who made million-dollar deals and commanded rooms. He was someone else now, a man who had to rediscover himself, piece by fragile piece. Lily never pushed him. There were no demands. No expectations that today he would be stronger, that tomorrow he would remember more. She simply sat with him. In the quiet moments, they would talk about small things, memories that Ethan could still recall, places he had visited, books he had loved, songs that had shaped the person he had been. But each time the conversation shifted toward the man he used to be, the void of his lost memories would creep in, and the silence would return. The routine between them was simple, almost rhythmic. Lily would arrive early in the morning, as always, to find Ethan still in bed, his eyes closed, but the faint rise and fall of his chest always assured her that he was still with her. Some mornings he would greet her with a small smile, his eyes half open as he tried to adjust to the world around him. "Morning," he would murmur, his voice still rough, but the warmth in it made her heart flutter. The sound of his voice, no matter how weak, was enough to make her feel like the world was right again, even if just for a moment. "Good morning," she would reply, the words becoming her comfort. She had come to cherish these small exchanges. They had become more than routine. They were the bridge between the past and the present, between who Ethan had been and who he was becoming. As the days turned into weeks, the hospital room began to feel less like a sterile space and more like a home. Ethan was no longer just the patient she cared for. He had become a part of her world again, in a way that neither of them could have predicted. There were days when his memories would resurface, flickers of recognition that he couldn't fully understand. He would remember his childhood, or a particular moment from his past, and it would make him smile softly, as though glimpsing a part of himself that had been hidden away. But there were still gaps, and those gaps were hard to face. "I remember a lot of things, but I don't remember what it felt like," Ethan admitted one evening, his voice quieter than usual. They were sitting together in the dim light of the room, the soft hum of the machines in the background. He was staring out the window, lost in thought. "What do you mean?" Lily asked, sensing the sadness in his words. She moved closer to him, her heart aching as she watched the conflict in his eyes. "It's like I remember the events, the facts, the places, but I don't remember the feelings. I don't know what it was like to live those moments. It's like they're just shadows now." Lily stayed silent for a moment, her fingers gently brushing against his. She had known from the beginning that this would be one of the hardest parts, this loss of self. Ethan had always been a man of action, a man who built something from nothing. But now he was adrift in a sea of fragmented memories, a man who didn't know who he was. And she, who had always known who he was left with only her love to guide them both. "Maybe you don't need to remember it all at once," she said softly. "Maybe it's enough to know that you're here now, and we can build new memories together. It doesn't matter if the old ones are blurry or gone. What matters is who you are now and who we are together." Ethan turned his gaze to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else, a quiet sorrow. "I don't know if I'll ever be the man I was before," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "But I hope I can be someone who deserves you." Lily's heart clenched at the vulnerability in his words. She leaned in, her forehead resting gently against his. "Ethan, you don't have to be that man. I don't need you to be that man. I just need you to be you. Whoever you are, however you are, that's enough." Despite the steady progress, a storm was building on the horizon. One afternoon, as Lily sat in the waiting area, speaking to the hospital's social worker about the next steps in Ethan's care, she overheard a conversation from a group of hospital staff. They were discussing Ethan's case, their voices low but not low enough for her to miss their words. "Do you think he'll ever be able to take control of the company again?" one of the nurses asked. "His cognitive function is improving, but it's hard to say. He's been in a coma for too long. Even if he wakes up, it'll be difficult for him to return to the man he once was," another nurse replied. The conversation lingered in Lily's mind, and a knot tightened in her stomach. She knew that Ethan had been a successful CEO before the accident, but she hadn't thought much about his career during his recovery. She had been focused on his healing, on the man in front of her. But now, the reality of his past life seemed to weigh on her in a way it never had before. When she returned to Ethan's room, she found him sitting up in bed, his eyes scanning the room with a look of unease that was new to her. "Lily," he said, his voice quiet. "I overheard something today. They said I might never be able to go back to my company, to my life. Is that true?" Lily paused, her heart racing as she tried to find the right words. "Ethan, we're not focused on that right now. We're focused on you, on your recovery." But Ethan shook his head, his expression hardening. "It's not just about me. It's about who I was, what I built. I can't just forget that. I can't forget the life I had." Lily took a deep breath, stepping closer to him. "You don't have to forget it, but you also don't have to carry it all alone. You don't have to be that man to be someone valuable. Your worth isn't tied to what you did before. It's tied to who you are now, to the fight you're putting up every day to come back." Ethan looked at her, his eyes clouded with doubt. "I don't know if I can do it, Lily. I don't know if I can be the man I used to be, the one you deserve." Lily placed a hand on his, her fingers wrapping around his tightly. "Ethan, I don't need you to be that man. I need you to be you. Whatever that looks like, I'm here for you. Always." Days passed, and Ethan continued to improve, but the internal battle he faced between the man he was and the man he thought he needed to be remained. There were moments of clarity and moments of struggle, but Lily never left his side. She had come to understand that healing wasn't linear. It wasn't just about physical recovery. It was about finding peace with the new reality. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a soft pink, Ethan looked at her from his hospital bed with a quiet smile. He had been through so much, but now there was a new calm in his eyes. "I'm not who I was before," he said softly, the words filled with a sense of finality. But maybe that's okay. Maybe it's time to build something new. With you, Lily smiled, her heart swelling with love for him. Together, she whispered, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, they both knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter they would write together, one day at a time. As Ethan slowly rebuilds his life, it becomes clear that true love doesn't require perfection. It thrives in resilience, patience, and the willingness to rebuild together. Lily's unwavering commitment and Ethan's journey toward healing show that no matter the obstacles, love has the power to transform and renew. If you've enjoyed this story of hope and redemption, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more heartwarming tales. Join us for the next chapter of Unforgettable Journeys.